My name is Karen Sebesta, and I'm an executive producer at CBC Sports. I've been working in the sports media environment for over 30 years with basic focus on live production and live feature storytelling, and as well as some production work. And my current focus is the upcoming Tokyo Olympics as a show producer and senior producer, and I'm the executive producer of the Paralympics for Tokyo and Beijing. So it's a busy, exciting time here in the world of sports virtually. My career in sports has actually been fantastic. I've had lots of fabulous male mentors. I've been very I don't want to say fortunate, because I think there's a lot of factors that go into things about how your career goes when it comes to working in adverse conditions. And what I guess I would say to everybody is that there's always challenges. Yes, in my career, I've certainly had situations that I've had to be cautious on how I navigate it, because it might have gone someplace it shouldn't have. There's a deflection to that. There's a way of understanding things and navigating it differently. Everyone is faced with challenges in their career, and you make some mistakes along the way and you learn from that. I think I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some fabulous mentors, and I've gotten to do a lot. Looking back, a man or guy might have gotten someplace in 10 years and it took me 15. So maybe there's something like that. But I think now that I'm here where I am, I've broken down some walls for sure. And certainly I am, the first female executive producer at CBC Sports, but that's because maybe there also weren't a lot of people trying to be a female executive producer at CBC Sports. I've had challenges, but I've understood and known how to navigate situations. And so therefore I've been successful. What I would say to people about equal representation, and certainly if we talk first about Olympics, that sport federations are the voice of what happens at the Olympics, and athletes are the voice of what happens, how they participate in multi-sport games, and federations support their athletes. And that gets down to equality between men and women and how many people can participate and things like that. So they're the advocacy groups for that. It is not my business or my job to advocate for how the Olympics are run. It is my job to cover the games in a fair way, so that Canadians can see what happens and understand the stories. When it comes to speaking about Paralympics, there are no stronger voices in the sports space than para athletes and para federations and advocacy. So again, they get a lot of support there. I think the only argument that comes to light that people like to talk about is the Olympics get so much play and the Paralympics get less. I'm here to tell you that in Canada, that is not the case. Certainly as executive producer of the Paralympics for this country, that we have equality when it comes to the way we cover it. Of course, there are less sports in the para games. There are less athletes. So you're not going to get the same broadcast footprint, but you are getting coverage in prime time. You're getting live sport. The way we tell the stories, the way we care about the athletes, it's all the same. And we do a lot, and we cover it on all our platforms. CBC Sports has a commitment to be 50% women's focused on all platforms when it comes to sports storytelling and the voices that we use. And I think what we have to do is talk about other broadcasters and other media partners. Are they paying attention to the Paralympic sports or the Special Olympics or other things like they do with hockey? And again, what I say to everybody is the day that this country cares a little bit less about hockey will be a great day for every other sport and athlete in this country. Involved in sports for over 30 years, I obviously have seen some changes, and there's so many pillars we could talk about, from technology to the sports we cover to the way we cover them. But speaking specifically to women involved in sport production at any level, women have always been involved in sport production. When I started, I worked at TSN, but certainly CBC and CTV Sports and even TSN, everybody had a female anchor or broadcaster or reporter. Now, there wasn't 10 of them, but there was always a one or two women that were involved. From a production behind the scenes point of view, there has always been one. And here I am 30 years later, and certainly behind the scenes, there still is a woman here, a woman there. Not a lot, but there are some. From an on-air perspective, women are certainly everywhere, all over sports, from referees in the playing field, to the broadcasting booth. When we see networks like Sportsnet and TSN doing all women games, I think that's great. I think it shows that the space has room to have that. But think about the TSN NBA game that was recent. All the women were on air. Who was behind the scenes making that show? Do you know who was making that show? Probably a bunch of men. I will tell you that there were some women involved in the production, because I wouldn't want to speak about this if I didn't know the truth. And there was a woman control room director, and there was a woman in a few other technical positions. But the decision makers, the producers, and some of the executives, again, a lot of times it's men. So you have to remember that, where are the women? If the women are in front of the camera, that's great. They're part of the storytelling. But more women behind the scenes does affect the stories that they tell. I think it's changed, but not a lot behind the scenes. And the strong women that are there are continuing to break down barriers and break down ceilings, and are continuing to say, we need to do this story or this story. So it's better, for sure. Is there room that it can still grow a little more? For sure. Every organization in this country has done a reality check and tried to do something different, and paused for a minute to say, what can we do better? And I think that's a really great, healthy sign. And certainly, only speaking for my own company, we have a commitment to do 50% of our storytelling on women's stories on all platforms. Our broadcasters, we're bringing more women's voices into that. We've always had female play-by-play people, but now we're trying to grow some more. We've had 2 of them. We're trying to grow more. When we write articles, we look at who's telling those stories. Should it be a BIPOC person? Bringing more ethnicities into the conversation. And I think if all the other broadcasters and all the other media outlets continue to do that, and make some decisions, I think you'll see change, and you'll hear different stories for sure as we go forward. There's male-dominated sports, female-dominated sports, and all sorts of things. But there are some mixed sports where men and women compete head-to-head. And one of the most obvious ones is equestrian. And that's where, it's about the ability of the rider and the ability of the animal to go around the course, and show jumping. So that's a sport that, since the dawn of time, has never had any equality issues, because men and women compete equally. That's fabulous if you can do that. If any other sport is about physicality, it makes it very difficult. Women and men are built genetically different. It isn't a level playing field. I think the narrative has to change like this. The quality of women's sports is not less than men. That's where the equality comes into it. A women's basketball game can be exciting. A women's hockey game has strong competitive athletes, still skilled in making plays. Instead, in the past, we've talked about the women's hockey game is slower than the men's game. The women's basketball game is not as aggressive as the men's basketball game. So we're ourselves, as journalists and broadcasters, are comparing them. You need to talk about skill, and you need to talk about the sport itself, and not those sort of other surface things. And so equality comes in a different way, as opposed to me directly competing with a man. That's not what's at stake here. It's about how we describe the sport. The only word that comes to mind is acceptance. And I think that means accept people for who they are and what they bring to the table. It's not about the judgment and the comparisons, but these are the things that we do in sports. Bone framework of sports analysis is comparison and predictions and judging. That's what we do. That's the narrative of sports. We compare people. And I don't know if we can really have true acceptance if without diluting what we do for a living, which is compare and analyze and judge. So maybe the first step is accepting that every athlete is bringing to the table the best that they can be. They're bringing their DNA, they're bringing their vision, they're bringing their hope, and we include them and let them play and accept them. Maybe that's the start, maybe. But I'm not sure in sports you're ever going to take away the judging and the comparison, because that's the fundamental thing of what we do. We compare. We want to find out who the elite athlete is and who's the best. So how do we do that then if we keep comparing and judging? Let's start with acceptance. And let's accept that female athletes are just as talented and just as skilled as their male counterparts. Let's accept that your sexual preference doesn't actually affect your skill. Let's accept that how you identify as a human to your family and community is not reflective of your talent as an athlete. And if we start there, maybe we move the needle forward.